A common misconception about British rule in India is that the East India Company fought and conquered a unified Mughal Empire. Looking at the political landscape at the turn of the 18th century, the authority emanating from Delhi appeared absolute. This map shows the perceived imperial borders in 1707. But watch what happens as we advance the timeline to 1761. The center loses its grip, and the geography fractures into highly distinct regional domains. It is tempting to blame this collapse entirely on the flawed, weak emperors who took the throne after Aurangzeb. The reality is much colder. The empire broke due to an acute, systemic economic failure within its own administrative machinery. By the time the British began their major territorial expansion across the subcontinent, the central Mughal authority was effectively dead. The company exploited a heavily decentralized state system that had already built itself out of the ruins. To understand how a massive empire goes bankrupt, we have to look at how it operated. The Mughal state was a highly centralized machine designed almost exclusively for revenue collection. It relied on the Mansabdari system, where elite nobles were paid for their military and administrative services through temporary land grants known as Jagirs. This graphic illustrates the Jagirdari Crisis. As the empire stopped expanding, the court kept appointing nobles to a shrinking pool of productive land. Look closely at this wealth concentration. Out of 8,000 nobles, merely 445 hoarded control over 60% of the revenue flow. With so few controlling so much, the imperial court descended into fierce factional warfare. Groups like the Turani, Irani, and Hindustani factions paralyzed the government as they fought over the remaining scraps of wealth. Down at the ground level, the consequences were devastating. Desperate nobles, unsure if they would keep their land tomorrow, squeezed the peasantry today, extracting the absolute maximum surplus they could. This severe economic oppression triggered widespread, violent agrarian revolts. Groups like the Jats and the Sikhs took up arms against a state starving them. The economic center could no longer sustain its ruling elite, nor could it protect its agricultural base. To survive, the periphery had no choice but to break away. The void left by Delhi was quickly filled. The resulting political landscape was highly structured, organizing itself into three distinct types of regional states. First, the Successor States, Awadh, Bengal, and Hyderabad. Powerful governors secured autonomy and hereditary titles, maintaining a facade of Mughal loyalty. Second, independent states, like Mysore, Rajputana, and Travancore, rose directly to fill local power vacuums. Finally, the rebel states, Marathas, Sikhs, and Jats. Unlike the governors or local chiefs, these states were forged in the fire of direct, armed insurgencies against Mughal authority. Each of these powers built its own military and fiscal structure. This three-part matrix was the actual geopolitical chessboard of 18th century India. Within this new matrix, one indigenous force possessed the sheer military capability required to fill the all-India vacuum, the Marathas. Their massive expansion stretched from Attock to Cuttack. But beneath this footprint lay a decentralized confederacy of fractured nodes, controlled by chiefs like Peshwa, Scindia, Holkar, Bhonsle, and Gaikwad. Furthermore, they relied on predatory taxation, demanding the chauth, a punishing 25% regional revenue extraction. This extractive policy alienated crucial regional allies, including the Rajputs and the Jats. When a true crisis arrived, the Marathas found themselves politically isolated. That crisis culminated in January 1761 at the Third Battle of Panipat, where the isolated Marathas faced a massive invasion by Afghan forces. The staggering loss of life and leadership at Panipat permanently destroyed Maratha cohesion. They retained territory but lost operational capacity to enforce a pan-Indian empire. Panipat did not decide who would ultimately rule India, but it definitively knocked the strongest contender off the board, creating a wide-open door for outsiders. That outsider was the British East India Company. Rather than fighting the whole matrix, they systematically targeted its richest component, the successor state of Bengal. Bengal possessed immense economic gravity. Before the company took control, this single province produced 60% of all British imports from Asia, rich in textiles, saltpeter, and indigo. The company's initial takeover occurred at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. However, Plassey was barely a military engagement. It was a triumph of corporate subterfuge and court intrigue, secured by purchasing the defection of the region's elite, including the commander, Mir Jafar, and the powerful Jagat bankers. The true turning point arrived 7 years later, at the Battle of Buxar in 1764. Buxar was a definitive, hardcore military validation. A highly disciplined company force stood its ground and decisively defeated the combined armies of Bengal, Awadh, and the reigning Mughal Emperor. By defeating the combined strength of the region's traditional rulers, the company stepped out of its role as a merchant body and assumed the powers of a sovereign state across the northern plains. The military victory at Buxar was codified into law through the Treaty of Allahabad in 1765. The defeated Mughal emperor was forced to grant the Diwani. This was the legal imperial right to collect and manage all tax revenues from the provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This diagram follows the path of the company's capital. Before 1757, Britain had to export vast amounts of silver bullion to India just to purchase textiles and spices. After acquiring the Diwani, the company stopped importing British bullion entirely. Instead, they used Bengal's own domestic tax revenue to buy Indian goods for export, while simultaneously diverting millions into funding the rapid expansion of a massive standing army. A foreign corporation was now minting its own sovereign wealth on Indian soil. While the surrounding Indian regional states remained wealthy, they were structurally divided and technologically stagnant. The East India Company faced them with unified corporate military discipline and limitless funding. The company succeeded because it never had to fight a unified empire. By hijacking the fiscal engine of a fractured matrix, they turned India's own wealth into the weapon of its subjugation.